First of all, my name is Paul Ligon, EVP of Technology at 3Share. So my role is primarily to figure out where we're going to invest our time and effort in new technologies. And part of that is also examining how we can optimize the technologies we're already familiar with. So today I'm going to be talking about metadata as it pertains to assets primarily, but also can be applied to a lot of other things. Obviously, it's going to be Adobe-centric. However, makes use of Amazon, makes use of other things, somewhat generic. You can make a generic version of a lot of what we're doing in case it's pertinent to other things you're working on. So first thing I figure we start with is the process through digital asset management that we're trying to optimize or streamline. Step one, typically speaking, for a creative person is to figure out what assets exist already, figure out what assets are needed, and the gap is likely what they need to create. So discovery is a huge part of any sort of asset management system, and by that I mean literally searching and finding things. Assuming that an asset has not yet been created and needs to be, typically every organization has a different process for this, but primarily you're going to want to create it and ideally house it in the same system that you'd house all your other assets. But part of that process also has a lot of sort of secondary tasks, things like generating views of that asset for particular software, particular portions of a website, let's say, or in e-commerce scenario, likely there are different versions, again, of an asset that you want to personalize based on the audience that sees it. So there are some tasks that you certainly can do manually, but likely you want to automate. And then lastly, once you've done all of that, you've thought of everything, in a perfect world, you're going to want to publish that asset for consumption. So a good asset management system supports that entire workflow. So it's basically centered around content modification, content creation. You likely will reduce the cost of creating new assets, specifically when you talk about personalization. And by that I mean having an asset that can change texturally or from a digital perspective based on what audience is accessing your site. Again, asset management systems like AEM Assets will certainly increase marketing throughput. We've worked with clients where you have one person managing multiple brands, creating thousands of assets a week, and we have companies that have one person managing one department of 10 people, and there are 1,000 departments in the company. So kind of depends on what organization structure you have, but in general, you're going to see throughput increased when you introduce a DAM. And then lastly, sort of creative autonomy. The less time you're spending looking for assets means ideally more time you spend creating them. So I guess if something is so great, like managing assets, making sure things are searching, or you can search for them, why is it often ignored? Or in our experience, oftentimes, the focus is on site development, marketing effort. It's less concerned with the actual creation of the assets that support those goals. And one of the reasons, I think the biggest reason right off the bat, if anyone ever has tried to find a file on their own laptop, organization. Organization of folders, organization of just files in general. Oftentimes I know on my desktop, for example, which I hopefully will be able to hide from you guys, is thousands of, hundreds of folders that I've used for temporary reasons. And so I just say, I'm going to create this for this one use, and then I'm going to end up deleting it. However, I never really get around to deleting it, or there's some other reason why I'm keeping it along, and I never quite get back to organizing it how I want to. Second thing is inconsistency. Some of this is I just forget what I name things, or forget am I going to use dashes or underscores or something, and then at some point I get a little annoyed at myself and I try and switch everything over, and it's a whole ordeal. So within AEM Assets, for example, there are a lot of different ways you can address this, but these are the common pitfalls that we've seen, at least, where someone doesn't modify all the different fields that they want for assets. So if you only use 5 of these fields, why are you showing 100? If you are creating a taxonomy, ideally all agree on whether you're going to use the singular or plural verb or term when you're tagging things. And then, if you have a file name that looks like that, you can certainly deduce certain things from that, but I think we all agree that you can be a little smarter. Now, that said, oftentimes companies have a naming convention that they have to follow, and as long as that convention is consistent, it's fine, even though it may not mean anything to a human necessarily right off the bat. And then I think a lot of organizations tend to think about what's right in front of them. They think about the site they're creating right now, not the site that they're going to need a year from now. And so you start down a path of creating folders that certainly work for sites 1 through 5, but 6 through 10 need a sort of re-engineering of your entire structure. So folder mismatches, that sort of thing. Tag redundancy, not only singular plural, but also just the use of a more generic tag versus a specific one, and when to apply that to a specific asset, that sort of thing. Generally, I guess, shows itself up in sort of a redundant way. So a lot of this can be fixed just by, using common sense, but that's difficult to do with thousands of people. If you've ever tried to organize a dinner or something, you realize that the more people that are involved, the more you learn about humans, I think, and what they're capable of. And so within AEM, we focus tremendous effort on metadata. And I'm not sure who, maybe 15, 20 years ago, was 100% totally purchasing legally all of their music. And they had to deal with something like, I think it was Music Match, Jukebox was a popular one. There were a bunch of different MP3 players. And so as you downloaded all these MP3 players, you tried to tag them. So maybe you created playlists, maybe I created a bunch of playlists. And I tried to organize them by genre. But with each new version of Winamp, which, what is it, really kicks the llama's ass? Yes, exactly. So Winamp, with every new version of it, actually introduced new genres, because we obviously want to be more specific in how we tag things, even when we're talking about our personal music collection. So, there's this concept of ID3 tags, and ID3 tags are just embedded metadata in MP3s and a bunch of other audio files. And so, again, every time that Winamp released a new version, they would add more tags. So the creators, or the consortium of, I think, just MP3 lovers, I don't think it was ever official, but there was a group of people who decided these are the genre tags that we're going to include. Winamp extended them. And then when iTunes started creating their smart playlists, and they wanted to use, again, more specific information to target new songs to people who haven't downloaded them yet, they too extended this. And now you get, if you search for a podcast, for example, in iTunes, it's pretty specific things you can search for, and it's worth a perusal later. But point is of all this that what happened was we had a group of people who sat in a room and decided these are the 79 actually genres that exist, and they anticipated that wouldn't be enough. So they created a way for that embedded information to expand. And so within AEMS, it's very similar. Oftentimes when you start a project, you're not trying to think of every single possible solution, but you're trying to think about ways that you can extend what you have already, or think about all the ways that you may work around issues in the future. And so within AEM Assets, you have the metadata schema editor, and it lets you create a schema. And ideally, you've thought about this a little bit, but it's so convenient to and easy to update that you have to keep that in mind as well. You're not going to think of everything. So again, we're talking about metadata. We're talking about how to get that metadata applied to a specific asset or set of assets. First thing you do, define a schema. Second thing you probably spend more time on actually is defining how you're going to get assets into the system. So oftentimes you spend a ton of time with a group of users on how the system's going to be laid out, and then when it comes time to migrating assets, it kind of falls apart. One, because people maybe get lazy, and two, maybe there's no defined process. So how are you going to import the assets? How are you going to take advantage of all of the different embedded information in those assets so that you don't have to do any sort of tedious tasks later on? So AEM tries to provide some tools for this. So things like metadata profiles allow you to apply tags to folders, not just tags, but any sort of metadata properties to folders so that you don't have to do things like globally tag that a photo shoot was taken in San Gabriel, or or that sort of thing. Those are things that you need. Do you want every single asset in a folder to be tagged the same way? You don't want to do it by yourself. That's one solution for that. Then, with Adobe Sensei and machine learning in general, you can take advantage of smart tags. So object recognition. Again, if you've played around with it, certainly it's better if you train it for a little bit, as with most AI machine learning type things, but it gets you fairly far in being able to search for things without actually tagging them yourself. And then organization, the ability to use a workflow to automatically route files into certain folders. So I would say metadata profiles are they're sort of like default values. So if you were to, let's say, have an event that you organize, again, you probably have photography, you probably have some sort of copy maybe that comes out of it, a marketing effort around it. All that information likely is going to have a few common tags and a few common properties. Maybe the person, the photographer, likely. Maybe that information is already embedded in the photos that you import. But if not, metadata profiles allow you to kind of do that level 1 automation. And again, sensible default values for properties on files in folders. This is especially true of like digital rights management and that sort of thing. Smart tags, again, the more you learn or you train the system to learn about the photos that you're importing, allows you to recognize brands or recognize specific things. For one client we had, we played around with identifying certain, one of their biggest products is available as a water bottle, not unlike the ones that you see in front of you. And so for this, it's kind of, again, tedious to tag 13,000 assets as Fiji water bottle. So as you train the system, it becomes more handy. But oftentimes we've found that that's just not enough. And so what I thought I'd look at more recently is using Amazon Textract. I'm not sure if anyone's played around with Amazon Textract, but Amazon provides about 13,000 different APIs for different company purposes. And one of them, this Textract service, basically uses optical character recognition to detect text in images, basically. So if you upload an image, let's say, it'll automatically recognize the text and provide you with sort of a bounding box around where that text is on the image. Kind of slick. Secondly, Textract does something I think even more interesting. It allows you to extract data from a document with meaning. So let's say you have an invoice, or you have a sales document, or maybe you are an insurance company and you are processing claims. These are scanned documents. These aren't structured PDF data, but they may have a table in them. This information can be extracted and utilized fairly quickly with Textract. And then lastly, like most machine learning and most sort of recognition software, it provides you with some sort of confidence score. So it basically says, hey, I'm 96% confident this word is Paul. And you can make your own decisions in your code, in your system, basically, to determine what you do with that information. So again, with OCR, what I'm really talking about is if you scan a document, it provides kind of identifies things along with where they are on the page, and I think that's really important. So if you have a bunch of documents that look kind of the same, you can extract the same. You can guess or assume the position of certain text and apply meaning. Once that information has been extracted, you can use it really however you want. You can use it within AEM, which is what I'll show you in a little bit. You can use it. You could pass it along to other systems, like all of the other Amazon services, or perhaps a third party, anything you really want to do. So here's kind of an example visually. I'm a huge fan of happy hours. In fact, I spent a great amount of time researching the best happy hours based on their location relative to me. So I'll do like calculation of the Uber cost of how much I'll save on the happy hour versus the cost of me getting to that happy hour. It's a whole thing, and I won't get into it unless you want me to. But point is that this is a great example for me, because when I upload that asset to AEM, again, I'll go through a demo of how this is implemented within AEM, but oftentimes when you upload a file, AEM's going to naturally index the contents of that file if they are text. But if not, it's not going to really know what to do. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that if I search for happy hour, even though it's not actually embedded in that image in any way, or it's not a piece of text in that image, the software will recognize that it, in fact, is in that image as a rasterized PNG or JPEG. But I think immensely more important, or more interesting at least, is the structured data concept. So if you upload, let's say, a W-2, a scanned form, something like that, Textract can automatically give context to the data that you're extracting. So for example, if you have a table of information related to sales quotes or estimations, you can get that information as actual data that you can action. So for example, if a PDF on the left-hand side here had a data table, again, scanned in, it will provide that information as text so that you can use it in your code. How does it work? Next couple slides, fairly technical, but the idea is that you're going to upload your image to the API automatically. The service will analyze it. There are a bunch of different ways that you can do that. You can basically do it asynchronously, saying, hey, here's a document. When it's done processing, send it back to me. Or synchronously, which means, here's a document. I'm going to wait for you immediately to return that information. And then once you get that information back, you can do with it whatever you'd like. But it returns things like the confidence of what it's extracted. It returns the type of information. It tries to identify numbers versus strings or text. And then it also provides geometry around it, again, like what I was talking about, the bounding box, the coordinates of where that information was extracted. So how does it fit in AEM? Well, once that response comes back, then you have basically a workflow that will save the information to JCR. That way, it's searchable. You get all the benefits of natural search within AEM. You can do things like validate properties. So one thing I'll show you later is when you have information that's really pertinent, or if you're expecting a document of a certain, let's say, a certain value in a certain area, you can flag that. You could email someone saying, hey, someone spent a lot and this is an expense that they've uploaded to their system. It's over $100, so let's flag it and let's send an email to someone. And then, of course, you can write all that information back to the file itself so that if you distribute that file, others can make use of it as well. But it gets even more interesting because let's say you're extracting English by default. You can automatically send that to Amazon Translate or a natural language processor or something to automatically have that information searchable in Spanish or in German. We run into this quite often where if you have multiple organizations spread across the world and people are searching for the same thing, they generally have to default to English no matter where they are. And maybe that's fine and maybe that's an agreement or agreed upon sort of workflow, but it's interesting that this is an option that requires very little effort to expand. So a quick demo. And this is the part where I get nervous that I won't be able to. Okay. That was way easier than I was anticipating. So what I'm just going to show you is basically what I've done is created a workflow within AEM. And this workflow is basically the workflow that runs when you upload an asset. You might be familiar with it. It's DAM update asset workflow. Runs on everything. It does all the thumbnail generation, all that fun stuff. I've added a process step, so just written some code that's inserted here that is going to, whatever image we send or PDF we send to it, it's going to upload to Amazon. Again, this is all secure. Obviously this is localhost, so this is less secure. But it's going to do all that in the background, come back to AEM, and hopefully extract information from those files. So with any luck here, I'm going to go to, so you can see my example here, already did it. So I have at least some confidence that it will work. Take some files, drag them into AEM. Okay. So I'm going to give that a second. I'm not sure of the Wi-Fi in here, but after a refresh, maybe 2, maybe 1/3 for good luck, everything in 3s. And then if I search for, let's say, caution. So, pretty nuts. But basically what it did was it sent that information back to Amazon and correctly identified it. So all I'm doing here in the background is saving it as a keyword on the document. So in this case, again, you could probably do 1,000 other things that are more interesting, but I think I wanted to focus, and I think it's important just to focus on the immediate baseline benefit of findability of assets. And a lot of companies have a lot of these assets, especially scanned documents. But also, more importantly, maybe you want to recognize if you have a shoe company and you have a specific type of shoe, and the label of the shoe is visible in a lot of pictures, maybe that's an easy way to find that model of shoe or that model of part. A lot of different use cases there. Second thing, again, possibly more interesting, is this sort of structured data. So let's say you have an invoice. So now I'm going to upload a PDF that is basically just an expense or an invoice or something. And it's this document's been scanned in. It may not have the proper, if you've seen scanned receipts before, you realize the quality of what people think is acceptable. That's fine. But if I upload these to AEM, okay, so Wi-Fi is super quick. What this is trying to do is find the total of the receipt. So it's basically looking to find how much money is in this invoice. And so ideally it saves it as a property in here. So it found the 3745. Well, I just changed that, but it found the information from the actual table, placed it in there, and I just have an example that if I spend $400 on tacos, then someone should probably approve that, or it maybe not approve that. But within AEM, you can certainly, extend this for whatever use case you have. But the idea is that that information is extracted automatically. And so, just kind of quickly, sort of a demo on the Amazon side is this is what the data that's actually extracted would look like. So you kind of see that it does its best to figure out what information is where. And then you, of course, have to apply your own logic to what you do with that information. In this case, I'm really looking for a balance due, and that line is what I've saved. So how do these help? So kind of quantify some of this. So it certainly reduces the margin of error. There is obviously some risk, some error that is introduced by any sort of machine learning. I mean, the idea is that it gets better and better and better. You train it and ultimately apply it to your specific use cases, and this number can go down or up depending on what's good and bad. But less effort in general by humans is a good thing, and it kind of just speeds up the entire process. We've seen in a specific use case 60% reduction in time spent with IT delivering assets to a marketing team. Basically, marketing team feels so confident that they can find their own stuff without requiring an IT person to come in and send them a hard drive or whatever, that there was actually a reduction in time spent. And then lastly, a scalable system is a usable system. And as users gain confidence, they tend to tell other people, and it's certainly not like, popularity of a concert or something. It's not like that, but it's more that within an organization, people tend to use the tool more, and the more people that use it, in general, benefits everyone. Again, I try to do some base cases to kind of illustrate how I think it's good even at the very, very minimum effort. But think about sales receipts, think about all the financial document data that you might be storing, or that you maybe never even considered AEM to store because of it's not really a document management system, but these tools allow it to perhaps move into that arena. So you can normalize financial data, you can automatically redact personally identifiable information from a scanned claim. You could find, again, information in documents that you thought was buried. That's really the main concept behind everything that we're talking about here. So more information. We're going to be kind of releasing some code samples from the AM side in the next couple days in case anyone's interested in playing around. You need a AWS account. I think everything that you'd ever do for testing wise would be in like the free tier kind of thing. But the cost to do something like this, as if you're familiar with any of the Amazon services, it's fairly tiny compared to the effort that you're saving in time of salary and all this other fun stuff. So some examples here, some more to come, and then that's about it.